Они жаждут, чтобы вы безоговорочно верили их словам.
They are using brutal fakes, manipulations, and even hypnosis.
Russian people are being killed. Ukraine Nazis have been shelling the cities of Donbass almost every day. I made a decision to conduct a special military operation in order to protect people who have been subjected to abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years.
They have changed their rhetorics for dozens of times, and you haven't even noticed that.
We will once raise our eyebrow and Ukraine will see everything without any illusions. We will capture Kiev.
And what is it in for us? Let's remember what they did after the Crimea. God forbid we take this counteroffensive thoughtlessly.
How do the Kremlin propagandists make you believe every single word? How many times should they repeat the lies so it becomes the truth for you?
Goebbels said that a lie told 1,000 times is the truth in the eyes of the public.
We will show you concrete examples of Kremlin's lies, from the very beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine to the present day. You will be able to understand for yourself how the Kremlin has hooked you on the lies with the help of mimicry, gestures, voice intonations, and psychology techniques. This is a special report, Propagandist Profession, Kremlin Techniques of Mind Manipulation. Many books have been written about the activities of the Kremlin's empire of deception, and even more have been filmed and investigated about the financing and salaries of propagandists, about the Kremlin fakes and fight against them. But very few people are willing to talk about how exactly Putin's heralds managed to fool a country with 140 million population. This is not surprising. After all, the methods of Kremlin propagandists are a mix of distortion of information, NLP techniques, and even hypnosis. To uncover all the underbelly of the Kremlin's hotbed of liars and manipulators, we talk to people who have been following and studying the methods of propagandists for a long time. Psychologist, a physiognomist, a rhetoric coach, a linguist, and even conducted a multi-level analysis of the voice of Putin and his henchmen. But before we talk about the results of the research, let's go back to the beginning. After all, Putin couldn't simply start a full-scale war in the center of Europe. The people would not understand that, so they started to prepare the people, all according to instructions.
Before attacking somebody, we demonize them by taking all demonic images from the mythology and history we used to have before.
We will come back to this instruction. For now, just remember the first step, demonization of Ukrainians. This is where the Nazi came in handy.
In Ukraine, all signs of fascism are not only in the mass consciousness, but also in use every day. A red and black nationalist flag, here such symbols are more popular than state ones.
The only presence of mythical Nazis in Ukraine was not enough. According to Kremlin's logic, the Nazis must do something. Preferably something very Nazi. And the propagandists have come up with such an activity.
Small children in the 3rd or 4th grade in the class of natural science are taught to feed tomtits because they are yellow and blue, Ukrainian birds, and SQ support, or better even hunt bullfinches, because they are birds symbolizing damn Russia.
But the Russians cannot be sent to the war because of bullfinches. The Kremlin needed a far bigger victim, and they made it up as well.
They took a 3-year-old kid, small boy in panties and a t-shirt, and nailed him like Jesus to a bulletin board.
The Kremlin fake makers have invented so many similar stories about nailed boys and shocked girls, enough to make a whole memorial. Putin's henchmen called it Alley of Angels, so to say, to commemorate killed children, implying that this is Ukraine that did it to them. But in reality, this is a monument to Russian cynicism and cruelty. Not once names of the children killed by Russian shelling on the territory controlled by Ukraine were found in this list, and some of the names were literally sought caught up. Occupation authorities try to hide it every now and then by clearing up the list.
Meta of any propaganda is about emotional level. The important emotions are fear, guilt, or shame. Also rage that causes aggression or arrogance. What is emotional for human is not a secret death and traumas. Children, of course, do, so propagandists use it to the full extent, like the Alley of Angels.
And this is what the Kremlin needs: unconditional subjugation of the population, who see Ukrainians as Nazis that kill children. This means we can move on to the second step of the military instruction. After creating an enemy image,
We have to state that the nation, the country which we are going to invade, didn't actually even exist.
for decades, Putin and his horde of propagandists have been imposing the idea of brotherly nations on the world so that the war would look like a territorial conflict to the West, and for the domestic consumer, Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic aspirations would be nothing more than a reckless stance of a little brother who has gone rogue. A month before a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin even stated,
And how was Ukraine made, after all? Who created it? It was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin when he was creating the Soviet Union.
Historian Putin has forgotten that the first mention of Ukraine dates back to year 1187. But historical facts are nothing for Putin's followers. After the deformation of Ukrainian history in the minds of Russians, Putin had only to implement the last point of the military instruction.
Johnny hit first. They want to attack us, so we just have to make a preemptive strike.
The mythical danger of attack is the same argument Putin used declaring the war.
This is a real threat, not only to our interests, but to the very existence of our state, our sovereignty. I made a decision to conduct a special military operation.
But words alone are not enough. In order for all this to be fixed in the subconscious mind, you need to send hidden, non-verbal signals, facial expressions, gestures, voice intonations. It is difficult for an ordinary person to catch them, but professionals notice them at once. We will watch the same statement of Putin with the physiognomist and rhetoric coach. Pay attention to facial expressions and intonations.
I made a decision to conduct a special military operation in order to protect people who have been subjected to genocide and harassed by the Kiev regime for 8 years.
There is such a stunt of a language, it's called reforming. What's that? It's when you know how to subtly change something to a negative connotation. For example, it's not the Ukrainian authorities, but the Kyiv regime, the junta, or whatever else they called us. It is such an imperceptible change that a person doesn't even feel it. The main task of reforming is to trigger emotions and preferably cause negative ones.
Putin backs up his black rhetoric with mimicry.
You can clearly see the disgust here. A set crease and a very rigid jaw is disgust with aggression. He has this feeling of disgust for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, for what is happening, and he is ready to take drastic and aggressive actions of disgust.
And Putin wants Russians to pick up on his disgust. That's why he doesn't even try to hide his facial expressions, as the head of a state should do, even if the state is terroristic. A lot of these facial expressions are just ordinary acting. The Kremlin dictator does not believe in Kiev regime or in 8 years of genocide, but he needs Russians to believe it. This is the conclusion we came to after analyzing Putin's voice. This technology is called layered voice analysis.
It was designed to combat terror. At the moment, it is applied and implemented in 50 Western countries, including NATO members. It is used in the interrogations We work with things that are not audible to the human ear. Every parameter is digitized. There is a certain sound wave, a pattern, and we recognize cognitive dissonance when the subject is choosing words, when he's giving out information from his imagination, and when he's just extremely scared.
Such technology is usually applied only to criminals who have already fallen into the hands of the law. But the company that owns the technology has recognized Putin and his mob as criminals, so it can analyze his voice, and the result is seen, or rather heard.
I made a decision to conduct a special military operation. It is worth paying attention to these two main parameters. First of all, the level of risk, hit return. When he's saying it, he's scared. And the second parameter, which is really above average, is the indicator of imagination. So he is saying things while he's scared, he's also thinking them up, and at the same time, he's choosing words.
We saw the same picture with the propagandists. They pander to Putin and echo his rhetorics.
Russian special operation to demilitarize and denazify the country has been launched in Ukraine. Again, this special. And the voice expresses aggression and disgust and contempt. And she shows it herself to incite the audience to the right reaction, because it is done specially. It is special operation. We do it on purpose. We don't have any other choice. Such security risks were created for a country that it was impossible to respond by other means.
And this segment, forced measure, the program shows the maximum risk of deception in this particular phrase. Skabeeva herself doesn't believe that this is a forced measure. Pay attention to the imagination parameter. It's well above average, so she's probably making it up.
If Skabeeva is more artistic, then Solovyov is quite reserved. It seems he either doesn't care or he is exhausted.
Or he always shows stability. Such a linchpin.
The Kremlin underlines that the word occupation is inapplicable here. The main task is to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine.
Even here, you can see such a pose. Hands behind the back, head raised, and it's like he's saying, "How are you there?" from the above. Such an arrogant head landing, and it's very comfortable to look at everyone from above.
This manner of behavior in the studio has two purposes. The first is to create his own character. Solovyov plays the role of a kind of commandant, or if you want, a gendarme of human thoughts.
He is now an evil policeman, very evil, outrageously evil, who can command everyone, send everyone away, destroy everyone, block everyone.
And the model of the same behavior and mindset Solovyov is trying to sell to Russians. Am I a trembling creature, or do I have the right? This is how the character of Dostoevsky's novel Rodion Raskolnikov explained his gruesome crime. He killed the old woman in order to understand what class he belonged to. Is he a trembling creature that is a simple man, or is he a person who has the right to commit any crime and feel no guilt? Solovyov does not bother his viewers with such questions. His task is to instill in Russians an unjustified sense of superiority and permissiveness.
Any propaganda starts with a clear understanding of the key points of impact. For example, Russians like to feel great. In fact, as long as you influence those right points that are in the mass consciousness and in the unconscious as well, of course, they will follow you. They will pay anything. They will pay with their lives. They will pay with the happiness of the children, with whatever you want.
And so that the fee is not too shocking, Solovyov chose a monotonous manner of broadcasting.
In this manner of Solovyov speaking, or when you are being put to sleep, what does that mean? When you listen to a person and his speech makes you fall asleep, there is a principle of Erickson's hypnosis, conversational hypnosis, when you talk calmly about something that people should be concerned about, but you say it in a very relaxed manner. At some point, the person stops being concerned and begins thinking, well, okay, something is going on there.
Though he is scared as hell at this point.
One of the indicators that shows a high level of depression, a high level of fear, his imagination is working. He's choosing words and 140 other parameters that show that altogether, on this segment, the program detects deception.
Brutal lies are the essence of the work of Putin's heralds, and deception is the constant indicator, as analysis of propaganda broadcast shows. The presence of fear among propagandists is surprising. It appears on the first day of full-scale war and the entry of Russian volunteer corps into the Belgrade region threw the propagandists into panic. Also, they were trying to hide it, downplaying the significance of the event.
What happened in Belgrade? How far did they advance? Did they capture anything? How did it end? They had the battle for the forester's hut 2 kilometers in, and it's not clear what they did at all. It isn't quite a hut, and it isn't really a forester. He's quite scared. He turns on his imagination, and what he's saying is just aimed at an internal audience. Because he doesn't think so. He thinks they've really been hurt this time, and it's definitely not a forester's hut.
Devaluation. Devaluation again. And devaluation again. That is when we have so much devaluation, devaluation, devaluation. This is not important, this is not important, this is not important. It usually indicates that we are hooked by it. We do not devalue what doesn't appeal to us internally. We are usually calm about it.
Unlike Solovyov, Skabeva did not try to downplay the significance of the events in the Belgrade region. On contrary, she aggravated and shouted about terrorists, so that the event in the region looked not like a logical consequence of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, but a terrible invasion of Nazis.
The number of the terrorists from the armed forces of Ukraine who invaded the territory of Belgrade region is not known for certain. There is such a technique in rhetoric called postulation. This is splitting. I will even show you what it is. For example, Kyiv, regime, criminal, terrorist. They make every word sound like the main.
So that the audience catches only these words.
Skabeva has interesting moments of specific deception that the program finds. In this case, we are talking about terrorists from the AFU, terrorists from the armed forces of Ukraine. She does not really consider them as terrorists. She has a high level of cognitive dissonance, so she has one thing, but thinks differently. She has a fairly high, compared to the average, very high risk, so she's afraid. She also uses her imagination and picks up the words.
According to the logic of Kremlin's horde, believe it or not, you must broadcast about terrorists and Nazis. Linguists from the Kyiv Institute of Forensic Expertise have been analyzing propagandist speeches since 2014 and have noticed a certain regularity.
These words that they are being told now, they remind me very much of the instructions given by Goebbels, which were then used by the German Nazis, who were occupying the territory of the whole of Europe. Everything, they say, is done to mislead both their own people, the Russians, and to humiliate our Ukrainian people. I have a feeling that there is some kind of a manual or some kind of instruction by which they act. Everyone was handed out one, and each of them memorized their words, and they used the same text in their speeches.
All this is a result of years of work by a whole cohort of propagandists under the direction of Kremlin officials. two deputy chiefs of staff of Putin's administration control the media at once. Sergei Kirilenko is entrusted with the internet, Alexei Gromov is in charge of television and radio.
There used to be such a system when every week in the presidential administration Alexei Gromov held a meeting with the editors-in-chief of the leading Russian media. This includes Russia Today, RIA Novosti, Russia Speaks. I think is a radio station. This is also Channel 1 and Russia 24. There are recommendations. For example, that there is such a topic and we should cover it from this angle, pay attention to this one and that, and this should be kept silent. Colleagues from the Ukrainian security services showed us a sample of these manuals, these so-called temniks.
The same Putin administration is selecting methods to persuade Russians. There is a whole arsenal of techniques. If you want to make a population doubt something, use the question mark method. You can use it to cast doubt on any fact. For example, that the Earth is round.
It would seem that many people are sure, and even textbooks say, and many scientists say, that the Earth is round. Listen to what I did. I put it in quotes. And the phrase begins, or rather stops, being so convincing, so unambiguous. Everything is ambiguous now, and it starts to cause the brain to doubt.
And if you need to discredit a person, propagandists use
a hearing head. What's that? The main thing here to smear someone in something that may not even be true, but to smear someone so brightly, so emotionally, that this person then washes off these hearings for years. Volodymyr Zelensky, they present him as a man who cannot make a decision because he's an artist.
Although a couple of years ago, viewers of the same Solovyev-Senskabeyevas admired Volodymyr Zelensky and watched his TV series and comedy shows. But now, for millions of Russians, thanks to the Kremlin's propaganda, Zelensky is
Nazi bastard.
For an adequate person, these words sound at least absurd. Volodymyr Zelensky has Jewish roots, his relatives were victims of the Holocaust during World War II, and fascist ideology itself is directly prohibited by law in Ukraine. But Russians still believe outright lies. Why? It has simply been repeated many times.
Grandpa Goebbels said that a lie told 1,000 times is the truth in the eyes of public, but in fact, everything is much simpler. In order to memorize information, it is enough to repeat it 4 times. After 15 minutes, the same information in 8 hours, then in 24 hours, and finally in 48 hours.
The irony is that the Russians themselves pay for the machine of their own deception. The work of propagandists is generously paid for from the Russian budget, and consequently from the taxes of the Russians themselves. Back in 2015, the US State Department stated that the Kremlin spends $1.4 billion, almost 115 billion rubles, annually on propaganda. Interesting arithmetics. The length of 100 ruble note is 15 centimeters. The length of the Russian border is 61,000 kilometers. If 115 billion rubles for lies are laid out in 100 ruble notes along the Russian border, it is possible to wrap the Federation 3 times. Think about it, almost 180,000 kilometers of rubles for lies. Most of this money goes to the fees of propagandists themselves.
In such totalitarian, well, let's give it its proper name, regimes like Russia's, the incomes of propagandists are in the main sphere of interest of the authorities. We see the incomes of Russian propagandists increasing, huge earnings even higher than the State Duma deputies get.
And then there are numerous troll farms. The most famous is Prigozhin's Internet Research Agency. In Russia, they were engaged in discrediting the opposition and whitewashing Kremlin officials. They became known after the American election meeting scandal. Here is what former employees say about their work.
When you're there as a worker, you get your terms of reference on the computer. It is written down exactly exactly how it should be presenting, how to set the accents, what conclusions you need to lead your reader to, basically your entire position on particular topic that is paid for.
I worked on forums. 90% of forums are about politics, 10% are about other things, but with the politics section. How you sow confusion, either in news comments or in a political forum, makes no difference.
After all, party propaganda should not only pour out of the federal media on a daily basis, it should surrender every Russian around the clock. You can save yourself from propaganda by following the simplest rules of media hygiene. Check information, read beyond the headlines, be especially cautious of overly emotional materials. Read and watch not only Russian media. If they are blocked, use VPN. Our TV channel and the entire UATV is working on bringing the truth to Russians. But most importantly, you must want to know it and break free from the web of Kremlin lies. Ksenia Barvinenko, Special Report.